Testing 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3.
Jeremy likes scrolling Instagram reels all day.
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Wait. The thing you need to realize is neither one of the lab mics are plugged in.
Wait, what about boom mic?
These are the things that are plugged into the lab mic.
Yeah, Maytal. Maytal, why'd you give it to
Hey,
me?
boom mic.
Them in here for voiceovers and stuff.
Oh.
And then we're also getting brand new.
If your
main
computer's
cameras.
about to power down, you should
Oh, we are?
Good morning, Graham School. Hello, my name is Maytel and I was here 1 year ago.
And my name is Tiny Tony, and I was here like 100 years ago. Today's Teddy Tuesday, March 18th, 2025.
Nice.
Today is Forgive You Mom and Dad Day.
So when you go home, make sure to forgive them or not.
Avast, ye scallywags! Pirates of Penzance is almost here. To see this musical on March 21st, 22nd, or 23rd, tell your grown-ups to follow the QR code on the posters to purchase tickets or follow the link in the bear tracks. Hope to see you there.
Leadership news.
The leadership class will be hosting a whole school tropical beach themed dance on Friday, March 28th from 4:30 to 6 p.m. in the MUR.
That's right, and admission is free. Just bring your signed permission slip to get in. Permission slips were given out in your first period class, and there are extra copies in the front office or in Miss O'Sullivan's room 32.
There will be music, games, dancing, and snacks for sale. Come with some friends and have a good time. Check out this video.
Club news. Here are today's lunchtime clubs.
It's the Best Buddies Club in room 54. Come and be a best buddy to make someone's day.
The Coding Club in room 48 with Miss Kaiser. Work with your buddies and use code to learn new coding techniques.
The Multicultural Club in Miss Galicia's room 23.
The String Clubs in Miss Chow's room 2.
The Choir Leadership Club in Miss Gatterlin's room 3.
After school clubs.
Attention, students. A new club starts tomorrow and you will not want to miss it.
The Bellarmine High School Robotics team is hosting weekly robotics workshop sessions for anyone interested. No experience needed.
Whether you want to program and build robots or just curious about how it all works, come check it out. Workshops take place every Wednesday from 3:30 to 5 p.m. in room 6.
Stop by and see what robotics is all about.
The GMSTV Broadcasting Club will cover after-school sports and create films in room 15 from 3:30 to 5 p.m.
D&D Club is meeting today from 3:30 to 5 p.m. in Mr. Mulkey's room 45.
Just be ready.
Lordy bees a tumbleweed chasing me. Ah!
Sports update. Today the Grand Bears take on the Egan's Vikings. The 7th and 8th grade boys soccer team and the 8th grade girls basketball team will be playing at Egan. The 6th and 7th grade boys soccer team and the 7th grade girls basketball team will be playing here at home. Go Bears.
Now we have Miss Kearns with your principal's update.
Hey everybody, what is that background? All right kids, so y'all are probably gonna be pretty mad at me after hearing all this, so just listen and do better. So we are coming towards the end of the school year, mid-March, right? At the end of every year, our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade team plans these really fun activities for the students to enjoy, like picnics, dances. 8th graders, you have promotion and the trip to Great America. And earlier this year, I told you that there's going to be a list of students who do not get to go on these things. Some of you have already earned your way onto the list, but we haven't told you yet. But you should know who you are. We haven't told you the criteria, but here it is. Listen up. If you've been suspended, you're on the list. If you've had 2 or more behavior referrals, you're on the list. If you've had 15 tardies, you're on the list. Now, we realize that you may be upset because you've already lost everything. But there is an appeals process. If you're really feeling like, let me earn my way back onto this, come talk to me. We can set up a meeting and we can discuss a plan for how you can improve your behavior for the rest of the school year so that you can earn your trips back. We want everybody to enjoy all the fun things at the end of the year, but y'all have to act right. We can't have you go into Great America if I can't trust you. I can't have you walk in the stage at promotion if I can't trust you. So let's be better humans, as Miss Mendoza always says, and start fixing things. Get to class on time. Stop trying to fight people. Stop trying to confront people at lunch. Stop using your Chromebooks in ways that are inappropriate. Oh, also, good news, elective window opens up on Monday, March 24th. You'll be getting emails about that, and you can pick your electives for next school year if you're in 6th or 7th grade. 8th graders, you already did that, hopefully. And that's all I have to say about that. Love you, bye.
Wait, what's the line again? I forgot. It's been like 100 years.
Well, that's all we have for you today. But be ready for the announcements tomorrow.
So be sure to smash those like and subscribe buttons. Have a Teddy Tuesday.
And go Bears.
Brought to you live by GMSTV. Sorry for going over time.